there's a lot of people here. Hi, everyone. I am Tatjana Rebelle. I'm a spoken word artist, an organizer, an activist, a mother of 3 children, and I am so honored to be here. To make myself more comfortable, I'm going to start with doing some spoken word because that's usually what I do when I'm on a stage or at a protest. I do other things, but we're going to mix it all together today. I am constantly an outsider in my own world. All the pieces of myself fighting for attention. Every aspect of my being grasping for acceptance, constantly struggling outside myself, within myself, to be seen as a whole. Because I am bisexual, biracial, binational. My sexuality was on everyone's tongues because the genitalia of my partner didn't match their norms. And no one gives a shit about the word bi until you're not in a heterosexual relationship. My own government tried to criminalize my then partner because their presumed identity didn't match their assigned gender. Wanting nothing more than kiss them on the streets without wondering who'd want to hurt us. Wanting nothing more to find a place where we could have gotten married without the fear of being denied a space because someone's God condemns us. Being faced with the notion of God, questioning her existence simply because of someone else's hatred. Constantly struggling outside myself, within myself, to be seen as a whole. Bisexual, biracial, binational. My father's only trace is within my skin. My mother's white skin and German accent was the link to the only family I have known, and 2 was carried across an ocean. Wanting nothing more than just be myself, but I am constantly reminded that I am too black for some and too white for others. Wanting to be accepted as mixed, but fully aware that I live in a place that doesn't give a shit about bloodline. Finally facing the notion that the only thing that matters is what they can categorize you as. Coming face to face with the notion that in that past, I'd be that house nigga that no one accepted, and feeling like the modern day equivalent when I walk into my job. Constantly struggling outside myself, within myself, to be seen as a whole. Bisexual, biracial, binational. My soul is yearning for a connection with my elders, but I'm separated by language on one side and the misdeeds of my father on the other. My history speaks of slaves on plantations killed by separatists and soldiers killed by Nazis during the war. Wanting to feel accepted as an American, but being first generation means the walls of my childhood were held together by German values. Wanting to find my place amongst my ancestors, but fear my story will get lost amongst tales of mixed breeds untold by both sides. Constantly struggling outside myself, within myself, to be seen as a whole. Bisexual, biracial, binational. And then I breathe. And I take a step back to acknowledge my struggles and my differences, realizing that no one feels accepted. Everyone is looking for a connection. The things that I thought separated me unites me to everyone. Black, white, gay, straight, American, immigrant, bisexual, biracial, binational. Thank you. So for a really long time, I thought that piece was the piece that described me as a whole. It was the this is me piece. Because I realized I'm the type of person that only gives snippets of myself to people. I have my activist side, my performer side, my children get a certain side, my friends get another side, whoever I see fit and what I feel is appropriate, I give a little bit. Very rarely do I tell my whole story. Aside from that, I also am a survivor. I have survived molestation, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, rape, and assault, all that began at the age of 6. That is also a part of my whole story. And I'm not saying that to be woe is me, and I'm not doing this for, it is my whole story, and it's everything that has brought me to this moment right now. So that's something that I like to acknowledge. Because I've been here, and it brought me here to speak about tradition here at Creative Mornings. And this is the time of year where tradition's very rampant on everyone's mind. To give a little feedback on what some of the traditions for Christmas are in my family is, being German, we celebrate on the 24th. We don't have a whole thing of presents out. Those come out after a forced nap for the children or after they're getting ready for dinner. There will be no pajamas in our holiday pictures. We actually dress up. One of the things I can never understand is why you have Christmas lights on a tree, but you wake up in the morning to like open presents. Like, to me, that's weird. Like, why do you have lights if you can't actually see them when you're having festivities? Also in my family, if you're under the age of 15, you have to sing to open your presents. I don't know if that's German or just a thing that we do in my family, but that's an embarrassment that I pass on to my children. And something that I hope that they also pass on to their families as well if they choose to have them. Krampus thankfully stayed in the old country. And instead of having this mythical human that goes around and floats around the world and dispenses presents, we actually just celebrate the spirit of St. Nicholas. But in my family, Christmas Eve is also a day of remembrance. This is gonna be hard. The last time that I got to see my Oma, who is not doing very well right now, was when I was 11 years old. And the last time that I was in Germany. And I very vividly remember sitting there in her house, telling me about the traditions that I was so happy that my mother passed on to me, and telling me about the Christmas Eve that changed our family forever. Through her German and the very small amount of German that I could recall and translating from my mother, I remember that moment when her entire demeanor changed, and I sat there, and as tears were welling in her eyes, she told me about the knock on the door. On Christmas Eve, my grandmother and family opened up the door to Nazis with smile and a posture that you never want to see a Nazi have, to let them know that my great-grandfather Frederick was shot point blank for assisting Jewish families with escaping. That was when I found out about the tradition of resistance that also resides in my family. And that's something that I'm going to be talking about today. That was the first time. Sorry, I have to go back on my notes now. See, I did go off the cuff. But I want to make sure I get all the points that I want. So, a year after that I was in Germany and found out about the history that I come from, and finding out that within me lies people that are not afraid to stand up for what is right, is right around the same time when everyone was kind of talking about the apartheid in South Africa. It was also when I was learning about Mumia Abdul-Jamal, Malcolm X. I was learning about the Move 9, as well as, and if you guys don't know who Move are, they were a black nationalist group in Philadelphia where the police decided to bomb their housing, killing 11 people, 5 of which were children. So this is when I started realizing what it looked like to be a person of color, not only in America, but also like across the world. I became empowered to want to do everything that I could to stop the apartheid in South Africa. And it was just one of those moments when I knew that I had to do something to make a change. I very vividly remember seeing when Nelson Mandela walked out of prison after 27 years, a smile on his face, his fist in the air, holding his wife's hand. And it was that moment that I knew change was possible. It was something that I realized that if South Africa can get out of apartheid, then the United States can get out of slavery, out of institutionalized racism. And it was one of those moments that I realized that change was actually possible. Going back to notes, sorry. A little nervous up here, isn't that funny? I can speak in front of thousands of people and still like, nah, it's good. So South Africa so one of the things that I also realized that if South Africa can get out of apartheid, I could survive living in Indiana. Growing up here, there's definitely some trials, there's tribulations. With my mother being my only link to family that I had, I grew up in Indiana not knowing the code. There's certain things that happen in society that if you're a person of color, there's language that you know, there's situations that you know about. My mother being the amazing German woman that she was, it wasn't that she didn't see color, she just didn't understand the rules of America. So I was put in some situations that most people probably wouldn't. I remember the first time that I drove through Martinsville, the person that took us through Martinsville had me get in the back seat, put a blanket over me, and told me to cower down as low as possible. I remember being denied access to high school because the quota for black students was full. And my mother said, well, then put her as white. Obviously, I'm 50-50. And the woman looked at her and said, she's black, get over it. And I got sent to school on the complete opposite side of Indianapolis. That was also when I realized how the disparity in education. I went from an honor roll student at North Central High School my freshman year. When I went to George Washington High School, which was where they sent me, I was put in junior accelerated classes. And I was still learning stuff that I had learned in 7th grade. And that's when I realized the difference. Going for North Central, I'm sure most of you people know about North Central. It's open, it's free, there's people everywhere. When I went to George Washington, they actually locked us in the cafeteria, deadbolt, chain. That's when I learned about education and what it looks like in communities of color. I could make it through that if people can make it through South Africa. You can make it through apartheid. And that was one of the things that it was grateful for me to understand that other people have had other struggles and that I can learn from those struggles to be able to move forward. So then we're going to fast forward a few years. Hip hop became everything to me. It was a source of empowerment, a way to find a voice. I had learned and just started writing poetry at the time. I was that awkward preteen that just had like my notebook and my headphones on, and I was like, no one understands me. But it was also this space that I learned to deal with my trauma. As you've heard me talk about, I've been through a lot of things. And there's a point when that bubble is inside you and you can't do anything except for get it out. And there was a point when I couldn't just have it in my notebook, I had to speak it out into existence. It became my therapy. Through that, I was able to form a spoken word night called Vocab, which is going on its 12th year next month. Thank you. Beside my children, I'm really excited about that. But Vocab became a space where I could allow other people to speak their truth and talk about their experiences. It is a space that's known to get really heavy, but it's on purpose. Because the one thing I learned in talking about my story is not very different from someone else's story. And one of the things that I've learned is when you speak out, it gives people the power to also speak out for themselves. I also know what it's like to wish that somebody would fucking say something. Sorry, I do cuss a little bit. And the reason why I'm so adamant and vocal about being present and being honest, it's not just for me, it's also for people that can't do it for safety reasons or just because they can't get the words out. I know what that feels like, but also the reason why I don't do that any longer, because I'm here, I've made it. And the more that we talk about what we go through, the more that we'll connect with each other, and the more that we'll realize that the stuff in the system that's set before us doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. It exists for money. It exists for profit. So that's why I do what I do, which comes from everything prior to that. Ooh, I really did go off on a tangent.
Good, we like it.
So then it was like hip hop, war and drugs happened. Rodney King, which was one of my favorite, the whole "Can't we get along?" That was one of the first moments when I saw police brutality and saw people uniting to make a stand. It's also very pivotal point in my life is, I hate to give him credit, Mike Pence. I have to admit that Mike Pence becoming the governor of Indiana made me want to step outside from just using my voice on a stage and in my notebook, and it forced me to go to the State House. It forced me to use my body and be present. One of the things that I learned is when you stand up in the face of an oppressor, it's harder for them to deny who you are. At the same time, when RFRA, do we all know what RFRA was in HJR3? Woke people, yes. When that started happening, I couldn't be silent anymore. I had to show up, particularly as a woman of color. Ironically enough, I was not out at the time of RFRA and HJR3. I was the biggest ally anybody had ever seen. It was like, yes. But I was also quietly fighting for myself. At the same time as RFRA and HJR3 was happening, I learned about a band by the name of Bayard Rustin. If there's anyone in my life aside from Prince, but that's a whole nother close second. Bayard Rustin, for those of you who do not know, he is actually the organizer of the March on Washington, the speech that, or the place where Dr. King gave the I Have a Dream speech. Bayard Rustin is always left out of the conversation because he was an out black man during the Civil Rights Movement. He's also part of the reason why I decided to come out. He's also part of the reason that I decided to be very vocal about being a queer woman of color that fights for POC liberation, because I refuse to be left out of the conversation. One of the things that I learned, unfortunately, while being at the State House is that the only other time people of color showed up were church groups in support of RFRA and HJR3. And that was one of the moments that I realized the struggle and the hardship of what it's actually like to be an out person of color fighting for gay liberation as well. But with everything that I do, Bayard Rustin runs through me. And also another person that I use as motivation to speak out, because he was denied the chance to do that. There was controversies out about him being gay, which is just that he was. And he was actually Dr. King's top advisor. He is the person that taught Dr. King about nonviolence. And he's also, that's why I'm so adamant about speaking his name, because without Bayard Rustin, there would not be Dr. King. And his name needs to be spoken at every moment that it possibly could. Ironically enough, which is not irony and it's not coincidence because I don't believe in those, I also work for the nonprofit that Bayard Rustin worked for. Bayard Rustin is a Quaker, or was a Quaker, excuse me, who are also like the most down people you'll ever meet in your entire life. Quakers were part of the Underground Railroad. They've just been a route for liberation in general as a whole across the entire world. I did not realize when I got the job at AFSC that I was actually getting a job at the same place that my life hero was at. And that was yet another moment in my life when I realized there are no coincidences. When you start being honest with yourself and who you are, the world will align to put you exactly in the space that you need to be, which becomes this funny irony of like the greatest gift you can give yourself is just to be truthful, because then everything actually just like works out. And the more that we fight it, the worse it gets and the harder it gets. And I know how hard it is to be honest, especially when it comes to racial justice and the dangers that are real with it, right? So earlier this year, I was asked to speak at the March for Our Lives rally. I was very excited about that one because it was put on by the youth. Oftentimes rallies, unfortunately, when they happen in the city, the ones that get attended the most are put on by people that literally just got pissed off by a picture. And then they rally all the people together, and then thousands of people show up. And they're like, can you believe this happens? And then those of us that have actually been doing the work will throw rallies and like 10 people show up. So this was nice to be able to be a part of something where the actual group that was affected was putting it on. It was at the State House, so then like everything circles back. Instead of being a person that was showing up to protest, I was being a person that was actually being able to speak. So I made that moment. I'm a type of person that take every moment that you have and use it, because you never know if you're going to get it again, which was a lot about coming here and thinking about what pieces I was going to give you guys. It's like, well, I'll just talk about this side. But I realized I might not get this chance to speak again, so I'm going to speak my whole truth because I can. And that night or that day, I decided to write to the kids. We all remember after the shooting, everything became very politicized, and it was like, vote and do the things, and like we all know, like voting, like, yes, please vote if you choose. It is a step, but not the end-all step. So I made a point to speak to the youth from my heart and from my experience. And a white supremacist got a hold of 10 seconds of my speech and used it to put out a video to defame me. The threat became very real at that moment. And it was one of those moments that I realized that I was tied to everyone before me. It was one of those moments of thinking about, it's kind of this fucked up thing, sorry, cussed again, when you have to be grateful that your attack is online, as opposed to realizing that everyone before us actually had to deal with crosses being burned in their front yard, or dealing with hoses and dogs and all the stuff that came before you. And how, even though the threat was real of online, and there was a moment when police showed up at my house and just sat in front of my house for 20 minutes. Mind you, at the time I was living literally in an all-white neighborhood, not just like I was the only person of color for blocks. Police never entered our neighborhood. The day that the video got released, a police officer sat in front of my house for 20 minutes. I don't believe in coincidences. I was supposed to speak for the commemoration of Dr. King's assassination that same day. And I couldn't get past the fact that I was living a very real moment that Dr. King has had to deal with, and every activist has had to deal with before me. So I made a point, I canceled my speech. I have children. And I had to make a decision of thinking about how far on the limb am I prepared to go. I have altered everything that I do in my life, as far as social media goes, the people that I interact with, because I had to realize that I have a son that I have to raise. My other two children are like out the house. And that is something that I want you all to actually think about, is how far are you willing to go? But the question is, you have to go. You have to speak up. You have to speak out. You have to check your granddaddy. You got to check your neighbors. You have to look around at your jobs and be like, oh wait, there's only one type of person here. This isn't right, and say something. Walking around as a person of color, we're constantly in danger. We're constantly reminded. Every space that we walk into, we have to think about if it's a safe space. We have to think, we can't just travel out of city and be like, cool, I'm driving down, like country roads are not fun. These are things that we think about on a constant basis. And this is why I ask you, when you're sitting in that moment and you hear someone saying something, that uncomfortableness that lasts for like 5 seconds is something that we constantly live in every day when we're not in a space that's safe for us. So this is why I ask you, when you sit in that moment of being like, maybe I should say something, say something. Acknowledge the fact that that is something that other people that are marginalized go through on a daily basis, and you can step through 5 seconds of checking your granddaddy. It's going to be okay. Because progress is actually never going to happen until we all take that step out on the limb. You don't have to be on the front lines. You don't have to go to the protests and the rallies. You just have to speak up. I really went on a tangent right there, didn't I? And that's what I want to talk about. That's what this is about, the tradition of speaking up, the tradition of resistance, the tradition of being an actual decent human being, because that's really what it's all about. It's just being a decent human being. You know, we think about trying to be normal as often as possible, and I push back on that completely, because normal is what? Is white supremacy. Normal is sexism. Normal is racism. Instead of striving to like fit into this box that is nothing for any of us, why don't we take this moment to step outside that box and be like, I reject everything that you say. And it's not going to happen until each and every one of us take that moment to speak from our heart and speak up and speak out. So with that, I'm going to close in a second. I want to thank you all for like this moment. Melka Bird, I'm going to actually shout out for a second, because she told me to like speak from my heart, so that's what happened. So I'm going to close with one more piece. This piece, in talking about like the portions of myself, I was asked to speak at an ACLU event, and I was really excited about it. And I was going to be on the panel, and it was during the Spirit and Place, whatever thing that they do. And the event actually ended up being sponsored by a group that I am adamant about speaking out against, a Zionist group that is very adamant about silencing Palestinians. And they asked me to perform before I went on this panel, because I take every moment that I can. I wrote this piece to perform specifically at an event about the freedom of speech, sponsored by a group that I, on my activist side, fight against. Like, you can't write that. Like, you cannot ask for a moment like that. Which is also why I decided to take that moment and use it to call someone out on their own stage. Because, man, ain't that great? Clapback is so real in my life. Oh, also, before I get into this, speaking of clapback, I'm not really good at self-promotion. But what happened with the white supremacist and the video, I sat with that for a really long time. And I wrote a chat book. And I created, thank you, which hopefully will be for sale here. Actually won't, it will be for sale here in a couple weeks. It's not hopefully, just doing it. But I created a chat book and an art installation at Future Friends. I was given a space to be able to take that hatred and that bigotry and turn it into something that was empowering. It's up at Future Friends right now. December 30th, I'm doing a closing reception, which you can actually see the entire thing. There's music and there's a video. There won't be spoken word. It's just going to be a space, come and you go. It's 12 to 4. I do not recommend it for children that can read. I realized that was if your kid can't read, then it's fine. If your child can read, you're going to have very, very uncomfortable conversations, and I encourage those conversations, but maybe not to this level. But I wanted to take what happened to me and what's happened to thousands of others, right? So this guy has published, he posts 2 to 3 videos a day. The video of me came out in March. There's already 300 other videos up, defaming people, spewing white supremacy. So what I went through is going to happen to people every day. It happens to all of us. But I wanted to take that moment to create something beautiful and a space for us, people of color, to see it and step in it. It was also wanted to be a space where people that don't experience racism could actually feel it. So if you get a chance, please come to that. Okay, now poetry, sorry. So thank you all very much for being here. I'm going to close on this piece, and then we can all go about our day. Okay. Her name is Dalit. She is 12 years old, and her childhood has been spent within a blockade. She has only known life amongst the rubble and the sounds of bombs in the distance. She wants to become a teacher. But the only education she has gotten is letters chalked amongst the only wall that remains of her school. With only 2 hours of electricity a day, her water is contaminated by sewage, the hospitals have become morgues, and she is cut off from a world that does not know that she exists. She is Palestinian, lost amongst talks of Hamas, brutalized by the military, labeled a terrorist, and all over a dispute about land hidden by the cloak of religion. No one knows that she dances amongst the rubble, clinging to what little childhood she has left. His name was Aaron. He was 45, a volunteer at his church. Like others in his community, he would often fit the profile. He was heavily penalized for petty crimes and had more interactions with police than he did with mentors or teachers, all because of his zip code and the color of his skin. He was black, labeled a criminal before he could get out of the car, never able to get out of the car. The last thing that he saw was an airbag in his face. The last thing he felt was 4 bullets in his back shot by the guns of police. Whew. His fear lost amongst his criminal record, their fear justifying his murder. No one will know what happened that night, and his name will get lost amongst a sea of hashtags, each one embodying a family and a community forever changed. Her name is Crystal. She is 26 and never felt like herself as a child, for her assigned gender was male, and the name David made her soul disappear into her darkness. The first time she was recognized as her true self, she felt the weight of the world released from her shoulders. The second time was shrouded in fists and heels of boots. She is trans, labeled an abomination and told God hates her for being herself. She wants nothing more than to be the woman that her heart proclaims, but the danger becomes so unbearable she sometimes fantasizes of the restart brought on by death, so she can come back and have her body match her heart. No one knows that all she wants to do is go unnoticed and to live her life as someone that sees her for who she really is. My name is Tatjana. I am 40 years old. And because I speak of ending the apartheid in Gaza and ending the deadly exchange between our police and the Israeli military, I am labeled anti-Semitic and a conspiracy theorist. Because I believe Black lives matter, fight for Black liberation, and stand in solidarity with the Muslim community, I am labeled a terrorist sympathizer and unpatriotic. Because I speak out against white supremacy and the patriarchy and settler colonialism, I am labeled an anti-white racist and told that I am the reason the country is divided. As a queer woman of color, I am labeled an outcast and a heathen by society and even members of my own family. But I stand here, fully in my truth. I believe every human deserves the right to live with dignity. I want people to know that I am a mother, and I'm a writer, and I believe in love. I stand proudly in the shadows of my ancestors and by the teachings of Bayard Rustin. I believe in speaking truth despite the threat of those in power. And now let me ask you, whose truth do you believe in? Thank you.